This podcast is about you. Are you ready? Take a moment and ask yourself, do I know the truth, and do I even care? Well, if you care at all, we have something for you. Stick around. We're a podcast that does not ignore the truth about life, people, or God. Larry Kutzler has been a pastor, a Bible commentator, a radio and podcast producer, and now is your host. This is a podcast you won't forget.
Recently, Dr. Jay Christianson and I decided to team up and to do some interviews with Trevor Rubenstein of Chosen People Ministries. Chosen People Ministries is a Messianic ministry that has one goal to achieve: to see the Jewish nation come to know their Messiah in Jesus. With ministry outposts in all areas around the globe where there are higher concentrations of Jews, you will find chosen people. Trevor Rubenstein lives and works from the cities in Minneapolis, St. Paul, and his outreach is to reach the Jewish community that lives there. Jews, like so many other cultural groups, have a large diversity in their culture. Some Jews are extremely religious, while others thoroughly atheistic. Of course, we think all Jews, being the chosen people from Scripture, would all have an understanding of who God is. Not so much. So, for the next 3 weeks, Dr. Jay Christianson from High Beam Ministries and I will be having conversations with Trevor about Israel, Jews, and anti-Semitism. Thanks again for joining us for the City Sites podcast. We hope you'll enjoy these conversations.
In the late 90s, I ran a very successful business. We made millions selling test and measurement equipment to the government. I had whatever I wanted, and I could have afforded anything. I could give away money to anyone. I could do all of these kind, good things. But I realized that happiness wasn't going to come from money and success, but I needed something deeper. It's a full Jewish family. My parents did well. My grandparents did exceedingly well. Our Jewishness was really important, particularly to my father's mother, on our identity and who we were. There's one time I went to a mall, and there was some Christians that came up to me to tell me about faith in Jesus, and I just remember getting angry with them. This Jesus who you're following is a false prophet. Why are you sharing this with me? I'm Jewish, and unreasonable anger, really, that I had towards them.
During the Russian Revolution, the capitalists blamed the Jew for being a communist, while to the communists, the Jew was the evil capitalist, because the Jew always fits the crime. To European anti-Semites, and particularly the Nazis, the Jew was a racially inferior intruder who had no right to live in Europe, or no right to live at all. That was then. And today in America, to the white supremacists, the Jew is non-white.
Jews will not replace us!
But to the far left, the Jew is a white supremacist who controls global events. Historically, the far right didn't want to see Jews at country clubs, fraternities, Ivy League colleges, or even in their neighborhoods. And today, the far left doesn't want to see Zionist Jews in social justice movements. For both the far right and the far left, the Jew controls the media, the banks.
Who's the master of the bankers?
The government.
Run the government!
And Hollywood.
Hollywood is like a Jewish wedding. It's like a bar mitzvah.
They both claim that the Jew instigates wars and revolutions. And these are the only things they agree on when it comes down to me.
Me.
The Jew. But wait, there's more. To the radical Islamist, I'm an inhuman infidel. And to the Christian extremist, I'm the Christ killer.
I could almost fall in love with you if you hadn't killed the Christ.
The white nationalists say that I'm a foreigner and they want me to go back to Israel, but the anti-Zionists say that I'm a foreigner in Israel and should go back somewhere else.
Go home, Poland, Germany, and America, and everywhere else.
How can I be all of these at once? Because the Jew always fits the crime. But the truth is, I'm none of these things. I'm just Jewish.
I'm just Jewish.
And these lies about me are nothing but classic, hateful anti-Semitism.
Today, we'll talk about Israel, global anti-Semitism, the Jewish community, and the Christian response. Back to you, amazing Larry.
Oh, I love your announcement. You're so good. You should have been in radio, or that would have been a good one, radio.
Wait a minute.
Well, you
Aren't
are
we
in
on
radio. You are in radio. See,
I could have done it in a Donald Duck voice if you wanted, but
no.
We'll go on from there.
No, we're going to be serious here today, Dr. J,
Yes,
because it's
very
a serious
today.
topic. In fact, I found this on the internet, and I think this is interesting as we begin our conversation with Trevor. The Israeli war against Hamas was justified at first, but what I'm noticing on TV and other news outlets is that position is beginning to change due to the humanitarian reasons, and that's usually the way it works with Israel, and we can talk with Trevor about that. Everything gets blamed on the Jews. Even if they have a righteous, justified reason for doing what they do, eventually it turns negative. And the UN actually has cited and put sanctions on Israel more than any other nation on earth combined. There's something going on here. There's an agenda, don't you think?
Oh, yeah, most definitely. And we'll talk about that. And Trevor brings tremendous insights to us. So, Trevor, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Jay. Good to see you guys, as always. It's been a little while, I think. So you both moved away from my city and left me here by myself.
Uh-huh.
And
Well,
so
that's okay. We know you're a big boy and you can handle it.
Well, we do have some supervisors around, adult supervisors, so they're keeping their eye on you.
That's good. Trevor, why don't you give us a little background on yourself, how you got into Chosen People Ministries to kind of orient our audience today?
Yeah, so my name is, again, Trevor Rubenstein. I was born in a town in northern Minnesota, as well as Larry, actually, called Virginia, Minnesota. And Virginia, Minnesota had it's on the close to the Canadian border, probably about a couple hours away, maybe. It's a place that there was booming economy during a time to where many of the Jewish people were immigrating to America after they really left the pogroms of Russia because of horrible persecution. And they settled there because, again, the economy was booming. Many Jewish people did. It's a place where there's a well-known Jewish man named Bob Dylan, who's one time actually professed Jesus himself. It seems like that is a continued faith, actually, by some recent interviews. But anyway, so my family moved away from that area when I was young because of economic downturn. And we moved to Littleton, Colorado as a troubled kid. I think that probably the best way to describe my background was I was a unprescribed pharmaceutical test engineer for most of my life. And I did that primarily, really, not so much because of the enjoyment of the pharmaceuticals, but actually more so because I was depressed, suicidal. And as human beings, we really have two things of value if you break it down. It's the ability to love others and the ability to receive love, because God made us that way for relationship with Him first and foremost, and then in addition to that with others. So it's a community that's very inviting if you just participate. Unfortunately, that participation leads to destructive behavior, and it did in my life. I was expelled from school at 17 years old. I eventually got my good enough degree, my GED, went to a local community college, and got tricked into a Bible study, actually by a cult, interestingly. And I never joined them by the grace of God, but they used the Bible, and we opened the Bible to Luke chapter 15, parable of the prodigal son. We read these words that meant nothing to me. Very powerful story about a young man who squanders his inheritance and ends up being impoverished, comes back home to be the servant, but his father embraces him. It's really a story about a lost individual being found, but meant nothing to me, as I said. So, but the one thing I wasn't expecting was the first time I ever read the words of Jesus was also the first time I ever felt the presence of God. Three things became very real to me. I was an atheist at this point. One of them was that God is real, because when you feel His presence, it's hard to question. Another thing was a recognition of how holy He is, which also gave me a recognition of my own sin and depravity, and kind of a realization that all of my problems were because of my own sin. And but the thing that was more really even impactful than that was that despite my separation from God because of my sinful actions, I recognized that there was an overwhelming love, and that love was coming through the person of Jesus, and he was inviting me through him to come to know the Lord. I struggled with this for a little while as a Jewish person because we are, of course, taught that we cannot believe in Jesus as the Messiah. But after that, for a little bit, I really gave my life to him, and he changed me. He took away my being suicidal. He really saved my life. If it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be here today. And I would have taken it. And so for me, Jesus was literally, in a physical sense, the difference between life and death, but not just physically, also eternally, of course. And so really my hope and goal became reaching other people with the gospel of Jesus. So I've worked in fields with people that I really empathize and understand. I actually have done quite a bit of cult work. I've preached the gospel in Mormon wards. It's the name for their church. I've actually preached the gospel in mosques before. So I've done a lot of cult work. I've done a lot of work in drug and alcohol rehabilitation, Christian drug and alcohol rehabilitation. Most recently, and I guess it's been for quite a while now, my primary focus, and always, I guess, to some extent, was reaching the Jewish people with the gospel. And so about 12 years ago, I took over what was the oldest Jewish mission to the Jewish people that was based here in Minnesota, and that was the Zion Society. About 7 years ago, we took that organization, we merged with a very successful, thriving mission to the Jewish community called Chosen People Ministries, and it's been a blessing and incredibly fruitful. And so we're really fortunate to do that. I'm the Minnesota director for that organization. It's an international organization. We're all over the world. Really, the mission statement is to pray for, evangelize, disciple, serve the Jewish community, and teach others to do the same. They're wonderful. They're very supportive, and by the grace of God, very effective right now. We have over 30 plus employees in Israel full-time. Our largest mission field, because we're based in America, is in this country. We're based in New York City, Brooklyn, the other Holy Land, and we have really people working in centers all over the world where there's most of the places where there's sizable Jewish communities.
That's a lot. You know, it comes to my mind, and I know we're going to bring this up again, and we're going to be shameless about this. You know, if somebody wants to support you and Chosen People Ministries, how do they do that? I want to get that out right now and at the end of the program.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, they can always go, Jay, to chosenpeople.com. And we have missionaries, as I said, all over the country, and we have people that can help you reaching Jewish loved ones and things of that nature, and you can contact them through the website. Also, if you just simply Google searched my name, I'm the first thing that comes up. So I'm the first thing that comes up, and I have a website there that kind of gives information about supporting.
Great.
Good. Rubenstein, Rubinstein.
No, Stein is how we pronounce it, Jay. Steen is how you spell it. So just to be confusing.
Exactly. I wanted to be confusing there. All right. Okay. So with all of your contacts with the Jewish community, both believers and non-believers right now, so tell us about this Israel situation. We see things through the conservative side of the media, the liberal side of the media, the wacko side of the media. Oh my gosh, what are you hearing? What are you experiencing? What's going on from your side?
Yes, and I'm in America. We have, like I said, many people that work in Israel, and I stay abridged to quite a few things going on there. But you know, personally, what I experience is mostly here. Well, I have friends in Israel. My family overwhelmingly is here, and most of my associates are. And it's hard, Jay. I don't know how else to say it. It's a difficult time. I've noticed a growing trend in trying to defend that my biological ancestry and the people associated with it are not innately evil. This is something now that I'm having to have discussions about multiple times a day at this point.
Okay,
so
could you explain that a little bit more clearly to me? Are there, what's the allegations? What's the thoughts that are popping up now that maybe have been under the surface for so long?
Yeah, so what we're seeing a lot of, and this universally seems to come out, right? When anyone finds an excuse to make accusations and hateful rhetoric and even actions against Jewish people, it kind of propagates itself. And so whenever Israel goes to war, that seems to be an excuse. Something that's fascinating, Jay, if you think about it, is why are Jewish people in America blamed even over what happens in Israel? I believe that Israel is justified in what they do, but what does that have to do with me? What decisions decisions do I make regarding Israel policy, but yet we're blamed. And so for example, the greater Jewish community that we're dealing with here, and I live in a very Jewish area called St. Louis Park of Minnesota. It's 25% Jewish in the community that I live. And the people are scared. They're being intimidated. They're being yelled at. People in the high school, children at the local high school were being attacked, Jewish kids, just simply for being Jewish. Again, what do they have to do with Israel? I have a friend locally who's she's a diplomat. She has an FBI agent that watches for her protection. She was instructed very clearly to remove the mezuzah from her home because it's not safe. This is an ornament that Jewish people often put on the corner of their doorposts that identify their homes as being Jewish. And this is something that we're being told to circumvent, to watch out for what's happening. There's some elderly Jewish people that I help out here locally that have noticed that when certain people come to their door, see their mezuzah, they are showing disdain, turning around and leaving. There's arguments in the streets. It's not a fun time, regarding this. And it's something that we're seeing increasingly growing. I've been dealing with it steadily growing, I think, over the last 12 or so years. It's something that really, when I was young, I didn't ever deal with, but we're seeing it increase, which I guess biblically makes sense.
Trevor, one thing I don't understand, and I know this program goes all over the world, but to identify St. Louis Park in Minnesota, predominantly 25% Jewish, yet they seemingly always will vote for a Muslim representative. And I don't understand that. Can you explain that?
So there's a historic left leaning amongst the Jewish population. Maybe this is something that you've recognized, maybe not, but the Jewish people culturally are very loyal. They're loyal to their religious system. They're loyal to their family. They're very loyal. And so once they determine to make a direction, Jewish people generally stick with it unless there's some massive reason for them to turn away. And so historically, the Jewish community has been very supportive of what would be Democratic Party, but the left-leaning political direction. Partially the reason for that, Larry, historically at least, is a Jewish person does not find their primary identity, the American Jewish person, actually even in their religious system, because most Jewish people are primarily secular. And it doesn't mean that they don't have some association with religious traditions and things of that nature, but what it means is that it's not the center and foundation of every aspect of their life in America. When people become more comfortable, more successful, often they gravitate away from those things, and that happened with the Jewish people here. But something also in addition to that is Jewish people in America don't have a connection to the land of Israel typically because most of us have not lived there for 2,000 years. But what Jewish people do identify in historically, no matter where they've been and what they've experienced, is a history of persecution. And so the Jewish people typically will support the group that at least seemingly states that they stand up for the minority. So even conceptually, and it's a talking point, right, from the Democratic Party, is that they stand up for the minority, which unfortunately is what we're seeing, is when one minority is in opposition to another, then which one are they going to take sides on? And this is what we're starting to see that's developing problematic for them.
Right, and that's what I've been noticing lately, too, is now the Jewish community is being thrown into a quandary, because on one side you have the right that many in the more left-leaning Jewish community are afraid of, the right, because the right is being demonized as these, bigoted neo-Nazi types. I mean, we've heard this through the whole Trump administration and frankly for decades before that, but now you're actually seeing members of the left, particularly Antifa, the Hamas supporters, etc., the college students marching out there actually chanting the same things and the same ideologies that you saw from Nazi Germany. That phrase, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Many of these college students have no idea what they're saying and what that means, but it is getting rid of Israel and a Jewish genocide. It's not about making room for the Palestinians. It's about getting rid of the Jewish people. And it's been amazing to me, like you said, Israel can get into a justified position. They can begin to act on it. And yet the Jewish people around the world are taking the heat for it as well. So that tells me it's more than just a geopolitical issue. It's a spiritual issue that
Yeah, and
I'm seeing, and it resonates throughout the globe.
Yeah, I think you're getting to the point there too, Jay, where even actually, we think that, conservatives are very pro-Israel, and there's some truth to that, right? But there's also a darker side of the conservatives.
Absolutely. I'm not saying it's uniparty here.
No,
but go ahead.
But the thing, the two groups I think within conservatism that seem to be supportive of the Jewish people, one of which would be those who are staunch supporters of democracies, because Israel is the only democracy in the world, and so they seem to support that as far as in Israel and their governance, which is probably a small minority of the conservative party that support Israel. Overwhelmingly, the support of Israel comes from evangelical Christians. Because people that are born again, that truly love the Lord, I think that they often have a love for the Jewish people. How could you not? If your book you're reading is written entirely by Jewish people, I said entirely because I actually believe Luke is a Jewish man, which we don't have to go into detail about. There's an argument, but it sure looks like he is to me. So anyway, but overwhelmingly, at the very least, written by Jewish people. The foundation of the Christian faith was entirely Jews, and our Lord himself is Jewish. And so really, we see strong love and support, God willing, out of the Christian community. Although, unfortunately, there are pseudo-Christian groups, as I would call them, that have completely abandoned Israel and completely abandoned the Jewish people, blaming them entirely for their people's own slaughter and attacks. For example, the ELCA just put out an official statement condemning Israel, actually, in these actions, and said that they're entirely responsible. And it's sad to me because, as a minister to the Jewish community, I see how important love is. And I see that when people recognize that you love them and that you care about them, they're more willing to listen to you. But a Jewish person doesn't understand the distinction between maybe a left-leaning church organization like the ELCA or PCUSA or United Methodist churches. They're heading more in that direction. They don't see distinctions between those organizations and born-again believers. How would they know the difference? And so my thoughts and my prayers and my hopes is that these negative connotations that come out of some of these groups, and even there might be some incredibly alt-right groups, Christian groups that blame Jews for killing Jesus still. I mean, that exists, right? Yeah. So God willing, the people are able to distinguish between you and I know that you guys love and support the Jewish people and have a deep desire for them to come to know the Lord. So I really appreciate that about you guys and the greater Jewish community, but the Jewish people don't know how to distinguish.
You bring up a very fascinating point, and I've been mulling this one over for a number of years. You're absolutely right. It seems that when people are Bible-believing Christians and they realize the Jewish roots of Christianity go deep, and its original fabric was a Jewish fabric that was in many ways torn as more and more Gentiles began to move into it. Naturally, the Bible believers tend toward loving the Jewish community and embracing the Jewish community. Interesting problem is if you're a Bible believer and you're anti-Semitic, that's an oxymoron. But we see an anti-Semitism that comes through ignorance because many even Bible-believing Christians have been taught that the church has replaced Israel and the Jewish people. But we also see an intentional anti-Semitism where people are just, for some reason, like you said, the more left-leaning crowd are more, we just hate the Jewish people. We have an antipathy toward them. And so even within we love Jesus, we love the Jewish people, even on that side of evangelicalism, you have a part that through ignorance stands against them. So you are really walking a lot of tightropes between these various groups. So you've got to have a lot of sensitivity and awareness and guidance by the Holy Spirit to make sure you're addressing things the way they should be addressed.
Well, we're going to talk about that more next week. We're going to talk about anti-Semitism. We're going to ask Trevor if he's ever experienced that, both in the world and in the church. But I found that in my personal life, my life really changed when I realized that Jesus was Jewish. I mean, that sounds so crazy, but I didn't realize my Christianity was about Jesus being a European religious figure. But boy, when I realized what you said earlier, Jay, was all the things that represents Christ, from the scriptures to, who he was and so forth. One of the other things, Trevor, which I thought was very interesting, what you said, is that the Jewish people are loyal. And so when they come to Christ, when they accept him as their Messiah, they're loyal, right? I mean, look at the Jewish evangelists and televangelists and pastors who are Jewish. I mean, they're extremely loyal. Speak to that quickly.
Yeah, well, we're stiff-necked, Larry, either for good or for evil, right? So, and I shouldn't say evil, that's not the right term, but I mean, in obedience or disobedience is really what that comes down to. But and I think that the Lord made the Jewish people that way. It's interesting. Someone was expressing to me that the differences in the way that men's and women's minds work. A man's mind is very singular focus, which can have some problems. But God willing, I think that one of the reasons that the Lord made men that way is because if they're supposed to lead their house, then they need to focus on what they have to focus on, which primarily needs to be the Lord. And so the Jewish people, I think that God had made them, again, to be a witness to him to all the nations. We can talk more about that probably next week. But so in part of that being a witness to all of the nations, something that the Lord has called them to do, again, is to stand with him in difficult times or in times of distress and things of that nature. And so the Jewish people, when they commit to something, they're committed. Yeah, and to your point, but overwhelmingly, Larry, when we come to believe in Jesus, we actually become active in full-time ministry. And there's something to it where we really get sold out. And, of course, Gentiles have that too, but it just seems to happen in large numbers amongst the Jewish people for some reason.
Let's talk about that. Let's delve into that in the next episode here, because, you've given me some tremendous numbers about Jewish people coming to Jesus and the result of that, which I also find a very deep spiritual connection to. But once again, as we're drawing to a close today, could you please give me the information? So once again, how do they support you and Chosen People Ministries?
Oh, bless you, Jay. Yeah, so if they simply go to chosenpeople.com, it's very simple. People can get on our website. They can support the work we're doing in Israel. They can support the evangelism work that we're doing here. We're doing a lot of wonderful things in Israel now. They could also just Google search my name, Trevor Rubenstein. That's TREVOR RUBENSTEIN. And I'm the first thing that comes up, and they can sign up for my newsletter and offer support.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed the conversations we had here today with Dr. Jay Christianson and Trevor Rubenstein, and we hope to have you back next week as we continue the conversation with 2 more episodes coming up. And if you have enjoyed this conversation that you've heard today, tell others about it. Pass it on. Give them heads up on what's being done here on the City Sites podcast. Every week we send out a podcast on Friday morning. We hope it's informational and inspirational, and we hope to see you next week.
This isn't the end. It's only the beginning of your journey to trust God for the truth you never want to lose. We can help. Log on to citysitesurbanmedia.com today. Remember, there's only one truth and only one God, and you should know them both.